Donald Grant, thank you so much for being here. We're here to talk about your experiences during the Kent State incidents of May 1970. I'd like to first start off by asking, the Kent State protests and the shootings that ensued were a reaction to, happened in the aftermath of President Nixon's decision to plan an incursion into Cambodia, or announced that he was sending troops into Cambodia
That's correct.
in April 30th, 1970. Where were you on April 30th, 1970?
April 30th, 1970, it was the first really warm spring night of the year. And I, along with everybody else, was probably in all the bars in Kent. There were a lot of bars in Kent. And it started at night, and in one end of town, and suddenly a bonfire of sorts was in the middle of the road, which obviously is not normal. So when people would come out of these bars, there's just commotion, and there were clearly people who were trying to get something going in an anti-war sense, which was not normal either, but they were getting the kids riled up as they came out, which caused the Kent police, which is not a huge force, to come out, and they didn't quite know how to deal with this. So eventually, as time went on, they got more help from maybe the university police, maybe state police, not sure, but they got the kids pretty much back on campus. But along the way, there were people throwing some rocks through some windows, or something through the windows. I don't think there was many injuries per se, but there was some damage. And it was just something that happened totally that's not normal. And now you can blame that on, the war issue, but had been there for a couple of years, but never close to home like was happening there.
There have been reports that the Kent State incident started out peacefully, and gradually it became more and more violent as the days ensued. Could you describe what was happening? Describe what was happening on the ground over there.
Let me do that by looking backwards now.
Sure.
These things were happening that first night. That night caused the university and the city to put a curfew. You couldn't go downtown the next night. Okay, so everybody had to stay on campus who was on campus. And the reason I bring this up is there's a pattern of things building. It wasn't real obvious how they were building or why they were building or who was building it, but later you could see there was an outside force manipulated all this. So on Saturday night, there's a big commons area, a flat area, followed by a big hill around it, architecture building on top of that. And there's a Liberty Bell that's been there for years, and if there's ever going to be a rally or any kind of protest or whatever, they would ring that bell and say their piece. Well, that night, somebody started getting all these kids riled up to come listen because they couldn't get downtown. And there was an ROTC building, an old ROTC building. It's made of wood. And somehow somebody breaks a window, and they've got a stick with a rag on it. They light that thing, throw it in the window, and it didn't take long, and this ROTC building is going up. They bring the police in, the university police, with fire hoses to put it out, and like magic, there's somebody there with a machete hacking the hoses. Okay, that's not normal. Somebody's manipulating things. The building burns to the ground. That is what caused the mayor of Kent, I think, to call Governor Rhodes for help. And that's when the National Guard came in that night. Okay. So as this thing continues along over the next couple of days, for example, the next day, there's a call for No, I'm sorry, the next day was a Sunday. Very nice day. Just, but you woke up and there was a military vehicle, all of the yellow lines in the middle of the road, looking at every car, on every building of campus, just guarding things, which was kind of overkill for most of us because there wasn't that much going on, but they were there. But that night, they declared a curfew, not just on downtown, but you can't be out of your dorm after 7 o'clock, or after when it got dark. Okay. Well, and all of a sudden, in one of these dorms called tri-towers, 3 towers, the center meeting area, there's the same people who had started this rally on for Saturday night in the Commons. They're back here in a freshman dorm, raising this anti-war stuff and trying to get these kids to come out and protest out of the dorms. It was primarily freshman and sophomore dorms, and they managed to get these kids outside and get them going. That wouldn't happen by itself. Somebody had to be manipulating all this.
Who do you think those people were?
Well, in the end, we found out it was the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, the Weatherman faction, which was the same group that disrupted the Democratic National Convention. That nobody quite realized. They knew something wasn't right. They didn't realize they were being manipulated. And that came out pretty strongly as we thought about it.
So what happened next?
Well, what they did is these leaders would go from dorm complex to dorm complex and try to get kids to come down and join them. And pretty soon they had about 200 kids, and they're walking across campus. They're anti-war, 1, 2, 3, 4, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, because the National Guard had been called up, and they had declared martial law, basically, which means they had control of everything. They had 4 big helicopters with big spotlights on them, and they would follow around all over campus, off campus, but they were following this group and trying to, and then maybe as you get the National Guard on the ground, maybe to be conscious of this. But this group is starting to get to the corner of campus, starting to head for downtown. So they're violating the Kent you had to be in your dorms after 7, they're headed downtown. As they head downtown, the National Guard can tell what's going on. And the National Guard had people downtown, but on the other side of a hill. There's a hill between downtown and Kent and the university. And as the kids were getting on the road, moving toward downtown, this guard group below it was lining up and getting ready to march toward them. On a parallel street over, and then behind these kids was another guard unit. So pretty soon as the kids are moving down toward town, they're being pinched slowly by guard coming from 2 directions. And the guard coming from downtown had, they had gas masks and bayonets and whatever. And they looked like a pretty ferocious group. When the group who was demonstrating saw them, they sat down in the street. Didn't know where to go. So pretty soon they were surrounded by guard. Somebody in the group said, "We want to talk to President White of the university and air our demands." Okay? And of course the guard, not really knowing what they were doing, said, "Okay, we'll go get him." They go get him, and they find out he's not even in town. So they come back and say, "He won't meet with you." Well, somehow in all that commotion, one of the kids got bayoneted in the chest. And when that happened, that scared everybody. Scared the National Guard, scared the kids who were demonstrating, and it just kind of broke up. And they went home. Now you get to Monday, May 4th. And all of a sudden there's these flyers around that say there's going to be a rally on the Commons at noon. And anytime you had that happen, they had to be stamped by a Student Activities Center approval. but there was nothing on there. So like magic, these things are being passed out, they've been pre-printed by somebody, and they're out they are, not looked at by anybody. You go to your first class, it's a fire drill. Can't go in. Second class, fire drill. Can't go in. Third class, nobody cared. They realized it was all not real. I went into the class I was in, I forget what it was, but that day was supposed to be midterm day. In theory, everybody had to be studying the night before. And nobody could study anything, it was just way too much going on. The professors I know basically didn't even try to do the test. They just said, what is going on around here? We should talk about whatever. I remember this one girl in one of my classes who said, I was in Columbus the prior weekend with my sister, and there was a National Guard group of a small number that came out to stop something. And she said, I remember standing next to some kids who said, we'll be in Kent next weekend. Didn't make any sense at the time to her, but it started to make sense to all of us, as we see we're being manipulated here, something's going on from the outside. The fourth class was very similar, and at that time it's noon, and the flyer said, rally on the Commons at noon. Here's the same group on practice on the Commons field with a bell. But here you've got the burned down ROTC building, and you've got several guardsmen guarding that for some reason. And then is this anti-war chants start. And remember, this was martial law was declared by the National Guard, which means you can't even congregate in a group of more than two. So they send a Jeep out onto the Commons with 4 people in it. One guy's got a bullhorn who's basically saying, by order of Governor James A. Rhodes, this is martial law, you're not allowed to be in a group like this. And of course, the response they got was a few fingers in the air, and
right.
the rocks being thrown, and whatever. So the Jeep came back, and then there was a practice football field maybe a quarter mile away, where the National Guard had come in tents, and down come about 50 of them. And they line up across in front of the burned out ROTC building, and this time they start firing tear gas into the crowd. And just so happens the wind was blowing from this side to this side, and the wind just blew it all the way. So the kids were going, yeah, nice try, you guys, and the other names. And they throw the tear gas back at them, and nothing worked. Okay, now they bring down another 50 National Guardsmen. Now there's about 100 of these guys. And this time, they line up, they put their gas masks on, they put their bayonets on, and they start marching in a line right toward the crowd, and fire tear gas. You know, this time, now the kids know there's more to this than just, throwing some smoke bombs out there. So as the guard moved closer to them, they're still throwing things back at them, but the kids begin to move up the hill as the guard got closer to them, and about 30% went to this side, the left facing the building, about 70% went on the right side, and they go up the hill, and the guard broke in a similar manner up to follow them. As they get to the top of the hill, they're on both sides of the architecture building, they go down, and the kids at this point have gone down the hill, and they're pretty scattered. And there's a road and a practice football field just behind that. And that practice football field is surrounded by 3 sides by a fence. Well, the National Guard manages to get themselves on this football field and realize they kind of back themselves into a corner. Now, but the kids, for the most part, I'd say they were 50 yards away or more. They looked scattered. But the guard realized they're maybe vulnerable in their minds. They would turn around, get on one knee, and aim their rifles at people. Okay, and then they realized, let's go back where we just came from. So they come back down over the road, back up the hill, and as they get to the top of the hill, there's like 6 guardsmen on the one end turned and fired. Out of nowhere. The other guardsmen didn't know what was going on. The kids didn't know what was going on. Some guardsmen shot in the air, some shot at the ground, and some shot at the kids. And as you know, they killed 4 and wounded 9. But the parking lot was riddled with bullets. And based on this book that recently was written called 67 Shots, I think that's the number of shots they fired in about 13 seconds. And when that happened, everybody just stopped. Nobody knew really what to do. I don't think the guard knew what to do. We had the faculty out there. The faculty was trying to get the guard to stop and back off. And most of the kids were pretty much out of the way, but there were a couple kids relatively close by that were killed. And there was blood running down the street. And it was chaos. And I mean, most people probably never thought they'd loaded rifles, but they did. But there's a couple things that I should tell you, because the National Guard had been called up the week before to stop a Teamsters trucking strike. And so they had scabbed truck drivers driving semis up and down the state. And whoever was against them was on the overpasses, throwing rocks off of the overpasses in the windshields, trying to stop all these trucks. Well, they called the National Guard up to stop that. They did stop that. The trucker strike got settled, and the National Guard was going home, and just as they were called up to Kent. They went from there to Kent. And so who knows what kind of sleep they had over the last X number of days. But that was just something that's happened. I can't tell you what effect it might have had or not had, but that's what was going on. You might have had very tired National Guardsmen who have different, breaking points in terms of whatever. The other thing that's important to understand, nobody understood this, but it came out later, is that the Ohio National Guard was the only National Guard unit in the country where they can have clips in their own rifles without being ordered, and they can shoot if they think their life is in danger. There's no other National Guard unit in the country that can load unless they're told to load, or shoot until they're told to shoot. So here you are with all these people with different boiling points and weapons, and who knows what people say to each other when they're out there, and this thing erupted. And from my perspective, I was over on the other side, a little shielded by the building, but I just said, this is nowhere you want to be. So I headed back to our fraternity house.
So how did you, after this all had erupted, how did you come to meet President Nixon in the Oval Office in
Well, I will tell you, we didn't do it on purpose. When this thing happened, the entire phone system of Kent, Ohio went down. It was not designed for everybody to pick up a telephone at once. So it went down. Calls could come in, you couldn't call out. Meanwhile, there was, whoever was in charge, National Guard or otherwise, I had gone back to our fraternity house, which sits between downtown and campus, and waiting for those people to come back, because they had, nobody wanted to stick around, all this chaos. So pretty soon, there's police cars from local towns, there's state police, there's county sheriffs, there's police cars coming into town as fast as they can get there. Their sirens are going. I'm not sure they know where they're going, but they're just coming in. A highway patrol car with 4 highway patrol guys in it pulls up on the front lawn of our house. Their guns are out the windows, at least except for the driver. And they said, school is closed for a week. You've got 1 hour to leave town. Okay, here's 20,000 kids. So told, they come from all states and I don't know how many countries, told to leave town. I mean, that's what happened. So we happened to be there. And we've been trying to figure out, a bunch of us, what the hell's been going on for the last 5 days, 4 days. But we decided, well, if the school's closed, well, we got to get out of town. Let's go to Washington, D.C., because one of our fraternity brothers, who was 2 years ahead of us, lived down there. I worked for the Chicago Tribune, and he stayed in touch. And so we called him and said, hey, you know, I'm coming out to come to D.C., you guys, can you hang out with you at your place? He said, come on down. So we get 4 of us, 5 of us, in my big brother's 1967 fire engine red Chevy, and we head out of town. We get to the first town, which is called Ravenna, Ohio. We stop to get some gas, and the guy comes out with a gun. It says, are you guys from Kent? Yes, sir. We just want to get some gas and we'll take off. He says, you fill the tank up, I'm going to watch you guys with the gun. Now, he kind of backed off a little bit. I made a phone call to my mother to let her know I was fine. I said, I'm going to go to D.C. to see a friend. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. Ravenna phones worked. So we filled up with gas, and we just started driving. And along the way, we tried to change the radio station, try to get to whatever the current signal was the strongest, and just started listening. And clearly, this Kent State was the big story. But the first thing we picked up is the National Guard or something. The first story they said was there were 2 black girls killed, students, and 2 National Guards killed. That was the first tidbit on the radio, none of which was true. You kept going along the way. You get to Pittsburgh and you heard something else. You get into West Virginia and Maryland. You keep getting different stories. So we decided to go to D.C. and we called our friend of ours. And we get there about 11 o'clock at night. And he says, meet me at this restaurant called The Hawk and the Dove. Sounds like a perfect name for D.C. It's a bar. We get there about 11 o'clock. The TVs are up there. They're watching the 11 o'clock news. Everybody's watching the 11 o'clock news. You know, that's the first time we've seen anything at all on television. At that point, they already found out they killed 4 kids and wounded 9 others. One of our pledges was shot through the neck. So there's no black girls, there's no National Guards killed. It was all just wrong information. And all of a sudden they realized, they said, where'd you guys come from? Because we're paying a lot of attention to this. No, we were just there. So we started talking to everybody else about all of this. And then while we're sitting there, this guy, Tom Rawl, says, you know what you guys ought to do? And by the way, all the way down, we are exchanging, not stories, but what did you see and what did you see and where were you? And it's, we were all in different locations. So we were trying to piece together these things over the last 4 days that didn't make sense. What's going on here? So Tom Rawl said, why don't you go find the congressman from Kent tomorrow morning, go in there and tell him what you see. Because it's, I don't know how they probably want some information. We thought, well, we had no plans, maybe we should do that. So we get up and go over to the Capitol Hill, go in the Rayburn building, look for the, congressman's name, Bill Stanton from Kent. And we walked in his office, and he said, we're here for Kent State. And by the way, we were fraternity brothers. We're all seniors. We all had our jobs, but we all brought blazers. And without doing that, I don't think we would have gotten much farther than that. So anyway, the congressman listens to us for half an hour, and he says, I got to catch a plane back to Ohio because it's the primary. This is Tuesday. I have to go back and vote in the primary. But I want you to go talk to somebody else. So he goes outside, and he comes back like 10 minutes later, and he says, my aide is going to take you over to Senator Dole's office in Kansas and Senator Saxby of Ohio, and I want you to tell them what you're telling me, but you'll have more time. And my aide will take you over there. So over we go. So now we're in there with Bob Dole and Bill Saxby, and we're kind of sitting in a room with some couches, and they're asking some questions. And it didn't take long for us to figure out they didn't know anything. There was no CNN back then. And half the news was incorrect. So they're having us act out, okay, you're the guard, and you're the students, and this happened, and they're trying to understand all this. And this goes on for 2 hours. So then we had lunch in the Senate lunch place with them, and they said, we want you to go over and talk to somebody in the House. I forget his name. So we go over to the House of Representatives, and we're telling the same story. They all had different questions, and as they were asking different questions, we figured out who was the best person to answer them, because they're involved with it or whatever. So while we're in there, somebody walks in his office and says, the White House wants to see you guys at 5 o'clock. We're going, ooh, it's been a long day, we're just getting going here. So, but they said, oh, no, it's not, it's probably some staffer. Okay. So, we get in the congressman's aide's card. It's a congressman's card. It's one of those Congress cards with little badges on the front, so they look like they're important. And we head over to the White House, but none of us, of course, had been there before. His aide had never been there before. All we knew about was this semicircular driveway, CTV. Well, so he drives on there, and they, oh, stop, get out of there. You gotta go around the back. That's how you do this. Okay, we go around the back of the White House, and there's a Marine Guard, two Marine Guards up there. And when we got there, they knew anything about us that the government would know about. I spent some time in the post office in the summer jobs, so they could check me out. They could check everybody out pretty much, and we checked out. So they said, okay, drive your car in here, park it on this left side, walk in the side of the west wing of the White House, or whatever that side is. And you walk down this walkway, and it's like, it's got a kind of a red carpet, not bright red, and there's all these pictures of President Nixon meeting on the USS Kearsarge with Apollo 3 or something. Here's President 2 of South Vietnam, and they're doing something else, and kind of interesting kind of stuff. So we get there, and there's a table at the end, and all these newspapers from around the country, and all of this Kent State plastered all over it. Somebody opens this elevator door and says, if you guys are from Kent, follow me. We get in the elevator. There's no numbers on the inside of the elevator. You can't tell where you're going. I said, how do you know where you're going? He says, that's for me to know. You don't have to know. We get out on some floor. There's a couch there, a couple of couches. And some guy named John Ehrlichman is the guy who we meet with. Now, John Ehrlichman, as we all know today, is a household name from the Watergate and stuff, but he was a special assistant on domestic affairs. None of us knew who he was. But he was a very smart guy, but he had a lot of knowledge because the FBI was reporting into him, and they threw a lot of FBI agents all over campus looking for whatever they could find. So he knew a lot about how this happened, but it still took him 2 hours to ask all the questions. So now it's like, I don't know, 5 o'clock or 5:30 or 6, whatever it was. And he said, well, thanks for coming in. If I want to get a hold of you guys tomorrow, how do I get a hold of you? Well, of course, we had no cell phones back then. But the guy we were staying with was moving in that day. And the phone was going in that day, so we didn't have a number yet. So we said, we'll just call the congressman's office. We'll just check in. If there's no message for us, we'll just keep it on our own. So that night we just had dinner, and we were just trying to understand what just happened to us. But we did realize we had information that nobody else seemed to have. Senator Case of New Jersey had called the congressman's office and said, if they'll come meet my office, I'll come off the Senate floor. They're just hungry for facts. So we were just drenched, just sweating, because it's just, we'd not been through this before. We're all 22 years old. So the next day, wake up, I happen to wake up first. I pick up the phone and I call the congressman's phone number that he gave us, and he says, the president wants to see you guys at 10 o'clock. I'm picking you up. We gave him the address. The other guys are sleeping. I'm saying, the White House, the president wants to see us at 10 o'clock, because they think I'm kidding, but they know. They look at me twice and he's not kidding. So the congressman drives over in his car, and he realizes there's 5 of us, there's 2 of him, and we can't all get in the car. So he said, we'll bring our car. We have our 1967 fire engine Chevy and his congressional car, and we're headed for the White House. Of course, his aide says, go around the back. So we go around the back. There's the same 2 Marine guards there, and they have a checklist that we're coming. And check off, fine. Somebody forgot to get the congressman's approved in. He can't get in. So we're kind of getting a little cocky and going, gee, Bill, it's kind of who you know around here, you know. So he finally gets in. So we go back, park the car in the same place, walk down the same corridor, get to the same table with different papers, up we come in this elevator, and when they come out, and we're in the Roosevelt room. The Roosevelt room is that cabinet member room you see when they all have cabinet meetings. You can look at the back of the chairs and see Secretary of the Interior, yada, yada, yada. We walk in there, and there's 4 people. There's John Ehrlichman, Bob Haldeman, who was his chief of staff, Ziegler, who was the press secretary, and Henry Kissinger. And they're barely paying attention to us at all. They're talking about the election. Who did they support in the primary here, the primary there? Did they win? Did they lose? It's all politics they're talking about. Lo and behold, the Governor Rhodes of Ohio, who called up the National Guard and gave a kind of a law and order tough speech, lost the primary election against Howard Taft III, primarily because his overreaction to Kent State. They killed 4 kids or whatever. So anyway, Kissinger leaves, and then somebody says, actually back up, Ziegler said, he's the press secretary, he said, you got 15 minutes with him. That's all the time we got to squeeze this in. So in we go, and the president comes around the desk, introduces himself, like we didn't know who he was, and he starts with little pleasantries with each one of us. And we're going, we get 15 minutes, this is getting chewed up. When he gets to the end, he said, the Congress's wife is the most attractive spouse in the House of Representatives. Like, that was important. We're thinking, oh my God, this is pleasantries. Then he finally says, let's have a seat. So here we are in the Oval Office, and we have the George Washington painting. Okay, this is, you all see up there. And obviously, he was going to be right into that. There's 2 couches, a semicircle of chairs. I was trying to figure out where we're supposed to go. We kind of figured out the semicircle was Ehrlichman, Haldeman, Ziegler, and the congressman. And then, so I sat on one side of Nixon, but not real close. The other guys were in the 2 couches. And Nixon starts talking, and he says, you know, this campus unrest, it starts at Berkeley, it goes to Madison, Wisconsin, it goes to Columbia, and now it's at Kent State, you know, and he's kind of fumbling for things, and we think we're out of time. And one of our guys said, Mr. President, here's what we're here to tell you. And we started going into almost our story that we have been telling so many times about how this all happened, what the National Guard did, and all these things we saw of the manipulation of all these pieces along the way. And he'd stop and ask a couple of questions, and he's not bashful with 4-letter words. But we kept going for maybe 20 minutes. And that time, at this point, there's a door on the left side of the Oval Office with no frame around it. And this thing opens up, and this guy in a little bit banking, he's got his suit and vest on, he walks in, and Nixon says, he's the what's the word? He's the guy that gets the drinks. I forget the word. He says, coffee, iced tea. Nixon says, iced tea and lime. It's really good, but have what you want. So the guy's taking the orders, and he gets around to one of the guys, and I was the guy, he said, I'll have scotch and water. And Nixon said, no, this is the coffee and tea time. Haldeman's got his hand over his eyes, going, oh my God, what have we done here? But, so then Nixon says, you know, I have these meetings all day long, and they all serve coffee. And you do this for 4 hours or 5 hours, whatever it is, and your tongue is kind of thick, you can't talk it anymore. And one of my guys said, in like the last 20 minutes, he hadn't said hardly a word. He goes, yeah, sometimes, that's what happens. So anyway, we go back into our whole deal, and just, we're making some progress. He's got his acting stuff out. Ehrlichman's shown him where the guard is and show him where you guys were, so we're kind of doing all this. And Nixon's just taking all this in. So now we're there probably 50 minutes, and the guy comes back in again, and he says the ambassador from somewhere is arriving, and the president, he can wait. He's probably the ambassador to Timbuktu or something.
And what's the date?
What's
What's the specific date that you're in the White House?
May 6th.
May 6th. I'm sorry, so go ahead.
Yeah. So we keep on going, and then he comes in again and says the ambassador is waiting in some room. Nixon says, okay, I gotta go. So he gave us all a pen, they signed the bill into law with. We shook hands around, and we walked out back across the hall to the Roosevelt room, and I was going, wow, that was interesting. But there were 3 things we asked him to do in all this. And we said, first of all, we think you should think about a congressional or presidential investigation of what happened at Kent State, because we were all petrified that the kids are going to get blamed for everything. And why not? It's anti-war time and all these things. So while we were there, he talked to somebody about getting Moynihan or somebody to figure out how to get this thing going. I think it's a good idea. Second thing we said is, if you can't have time to meet with college kids, and by the way, the big rap on him was, he has surrounded himself with Ehrlichman and Haldeman filtered out who got to see Nixon, okay? And so he was being viewed as sheltered or whatever. So if you can't get out there, there's a big Washington Monument anti-war rally on Saturday. Send your staff out there just to get some feedback for you. And so, listen. And the third thing we asked is, we know there's going to be investigations by the FBI. We know there's going to be, if you do a presidential commission on this stuff, they'll have a report. And the local county, Portage County grand jury will probably blame the kids for everything anyway. But what we'd like you to do is when these reports come in, is to come out and say what you think happened. So those are the things we asked for, and we left. So now we're back across the way, and Ziegler says, first of all, I don't think I've seen him listen like that in a long time. I mean, he was really in this, trying to figure this thing out. Secondly, the White House press corps downstairs gets his agenda every day. It only gets broken if something's happened. Now, 15 minutes or so we can squeeze in, an hour we can't squeeze in. Okay, they're going to want to know, who did he meet with, what happened, what's going on. So if I say, well, he met with 5 people from Kent State, that doesn't tell them much. If you would have your own press conference, which we'll set up, you can tell your story, just the way it happened. So they made us feel like unpatriotic we didn't do it, in a way, or not very smart. So the congressman says, I can set this thing up. So Ziegler says, what you got to do is go back to where you stand and come up with a statement for the press, just a statement of what you guys want to say. And the congressman said, I've got to do the same thing. And then Tom Rawl, the guy we're staying with, who happened to be a Chicago Tribune reporter, by the way, he said, I'll help you with this. I know how to do this. Okay, so we break up. We head back to where we were staying. And Tom Rawl says, well, start telling me everything you heard and said until the time you get out of there. And we'll try to put together from that what we're going to say. Okay, so we're starting to do that. But the congressman said, when you get to your flat, call my office and do not hang the phone up. Because my phone's will ring off the hook. I gotta keep the line open around that. I could lose track of you guys. So plus we have to get some information. So we were taking turns on the phone, talking to some person on the other end who's taking turns. And they say, okay, the press conference is scheduled for 3 o'clock in the Rayburn building. I'm not sure what time it is, maybe it's 1:30 or something. And we're trying to write this thing. But we're taking turns talking to the person, and they're asking us, like, okay, what's your parents' phone numbers, addresses, you know, all this stuff, what's some of your background. And we were asking, well, who goes to this thing? And they said, well, you start out with the networks and the wire services and all the major papers, and then there might be 200 people there. So we said, we've seen some of these on TV, they don't look real friendly, but okay. So while they were on there, one of them, they were calling our parents to tell them what had just happened, and to be aware, and watch the nightly news tonight. Because the nightly news, at least in DC, the ABC goes at 5:30, and CBS goes at 6, and NBC, no, it's ABC, NBC, CBS, and they don't have this overlap, because apparently the politician types want to see themselves on TV at night, so they can't watch 2 things at once. Okay? So somebody called my mother, who's a receptionist in a beauty shop in Glen Rock, New Jersey, and they tell her that your son has just left a meeting in the Oval Office of the White House, and I would turn the nightly news on tonight. She says, you know, he called and said he was going to go see a friend in Washington. I didn't know he knew the president. Look, that's the kind of stuff you get. We have more other things like that with other parents who didn't even believe couldn't be my kid anyway. So we started watching the news. The ABC went first, and we were first thing on every one of them. And they portrayed it pretty well. Man, one part I forgot to tell you, the press conference itself. Okay, I jumped ahead. We were filling out this thing for the statement for the press, and it's like 10 minutes to 3, and we're typing this thing, and we're trying to figure out the last paragraph. And the congressman gets on the phone. He thinks we're not coming. He says, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, we're typing up your statement for the press." He says, "I've got 4 stenos here waiting for you guys to get here. Get over here." So okay, so we get over there, and we drop off what we had, and one of the guys said to do the last paragraph because we didn't finish it. And so he says, "Follow me." So we got on a couple corridors, and there's a big white ABC color camera in the door of one of them with all these wires coming out. And we look inside, and it's some sloped down, sunken deal with microphones all over the table and wires. As we walk in, we're in blazers. We've heard several comments like, "These don't look like college kids to us. Come on, what's going on here?" And you could hear them yapping among themselves. So we're down there, sitting there with a congressman in the middle on both sides. And that's the first time we were starting to get really nervous, because we weren't used to any of this, let's put it that way. But having 200 people with cameras at you and, writing things out, and you look in the front row, where the networks are, and there was Nancy Dickerson, there was Donaldson, all the guys you see on TV who do White House press corps stuff, there they are. And so it took them like 5 minutes to get the lighting to work and the sound to work, and I finally said, okay. So the congressman read a 1-page sheet, basically says, these guys walked in my office on Monday morning and didn't know a thing about them. They started telling me some information from Kent. I said, boy, there's something here. I got to get back to vote. I sent them over Senator Dole and Senator Saxby. They spent 2 hours over there. Then they met with so-and-so, and they spent 2 hours over there. And then they went and met with John Ehrlichman that night. And this morning, they met with the president, along with Ehrlichman, Haldeman, and Ziegler. And here they are. So it's going to take colors. It's got to be reading our deal, which we put together with a lot of the stuff we just talked about. He had to make up the last paragraph, and whatever he said worked. So then they opened the questions to these networks, and they were pretty straightforward. And then they got the wire services, yeah. And then you get into the newspapers, and you get this one guy who, all he wanted was to know, were we for or against the war? Each one of it. That's all he wanted to know. He didn't seem to care that 4 kids just got killed and 7 kids got, 9 kids got wounded and all this. And all he wanted to do was hear about that. And we just said, look, we're not here to do that. We wouldn't stop. So I had this is one picture of me with my pen and saying, we're not going to go into that for the 3rd time. And that picture ended up on the front page of every newspaper in the country, probably because it's a wire service deal. So anyway, this stuff goes on, and of the 5 of us, 2 of us were on one end, and the other guys were on the other end. And they froze. They just froze. When questions came that we knew were their questions, they were hesitating. So my big brother and I started answering these things. And it was just the strangest deal. And then about half an hour later, 45 minutes later, somebody in the back of the room says, thank you very much. And the back of the room heads for the phones, and the front of the room heads for us, which is what Congressman said will probably happen to you. And they all want to get a scoop of some sort. Don't talk to them. Just let them go away. And then get back to my office, which we did, get back to the office. And then once the crowds had gone and hanger honors had gone, we went back to watch the news, and that's when ABC was fine, NBC was fine. CBS was Dan Rather. And Dan Rather was, you could really tell, he was very pro-kids. He thought this was ridiculous, without being, he's trying to be balanced, but you can tell. He was just thought this National Guard was a real problem. So that took care of that. So now we got in Tom Ronald's house with a brand new phone just installed with an unlisted number. The phone starts ringing. It's the New York Times. It's the Chicago Tribune. It's the Donahue show in Chicago. How they get these numbers, I don't know. But they all want scoops. They all want this. And then Donahue said, I want you guys to come to Chicago. Whatever dates, as soon as you can come. And so we said, oh, well, maybe we'll do that. Some other guys went to Cleveland and were on the local TV show there, and somebody else went somewhere else. But we get back in Chicago, and Donahue's, this shows how bizarre the world was. Some of the calls coming in were like, they were calling us communists, and they should have shot a lot more of you, and yada, 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 and how Donahue's trying, come on, get it, cut it out. And this is how it was. It was just so, it's like it is today. Everybody's after everybody. It's just crazy. So we finished that up. And as we're getting ready to leave to go back to Kent, I think it was Friday morning, we were not going to stay for the rally. That Thursday, the White House announces that they're going to send their staff to the Saturday anti-war rally. That was kind of interesting. And then, so we are getting ready to head back on Friday. And lo and behold, the first thing that happens on Friday morning is the FBI calls up and says, we want to talk to you, we're coming over right now. 2 guys show up. I thought they were the press, just playing games. Nope. FBI. They wanted to know any little thing any of us had seen for the last five days. Did you see anything, hear anything that might lead you to believe something was going on? I mean, very thorough, just pointing questions, taking notes, and we really couldn't give them anything more than we were able to tell people. Nothing popped out at us other than we thought the manipulation was going on. So we started heading back, and Saturday morning, we hear that Nixon, at 5 in the morning, took one Secret Service guy and went over to the Lincoln Memorial, the 2 of them, and he sat there on the steps with the kids and started talking to him. We go, wow, We did get through it. I mean, we did that. If you looked at the memoirs, or the books that Ehrlichman wrote and Haldeman wrote later about all this, I think it was in Howard Means' book, they thought that was the dumbest thing he'd ever did. They were shocked that he did that, but he did. So either, we don't know whether we were kind of pawns, like, okay, I'm gonna show you, I'm talking to the students, or we really fed it, says, I gotta figure this thing out. We don't really know. So that's, so we go back to Kent. The FBI comes to our apartment and does the same thing again. 2 different guys, asking more questions. I drive back to New Jersey the next day. They get me in my parents, my mother's apartment in Jersey. They come over there. I mean, I was like, this is really something. They're so thorough. But there's a longer story that lasts years later, but it's not worth all the time you're spending.
Sure.
But,
From your perspective, what do you think the legacy of the Kent State incident?
Let me tell you one more tidbit, and I'll ask that question. It's January of '71. This happened in May of '70. I'm working at Wells Fargo Bank in California. I'm on a training cycle. It's in Burlingame, California on a Friday afternoon. And I got some little old lady at my desk wants to open a checking account. But before I said that, what I should say is I wrote a letter to Nixon that week and said, you may remember we were in your office on these dates, and we asked you to do things. Campus unrest, the commission, you did that. You sent your staff to the rally. You know, you went to the thing yourself. But we also asked you, when it's all said and done and all the reports are in, and they were all in by this time, what's your opinion of what happened? You got an FBI report, you got a Scranton Commission on campus unrest, and you got this Portage County grand jury thing. And I sent the letter off and said we were going to answer it. That's the part you haven't answered. It's not been, all the reports are in. So I get this phone call. It comes into the bank, and I get this lady at my desk, and somebody says, it's the White House is on the phone for you. And she says, you can do better than that. I said, no, it's entirely possible this is happening. And so I go across the bank, I pick up the phone, and I hear about 3 other extensions going up. And it was Bob Finch. And Bob Finch was Nixon's chief of staff, I think, at one point. In fact, you knew that last time I talked to you.
He was the former lieutenant governor of California, and he was head of housing, education, and welfare, or no, health, education, welfare, and then he became counselor of the president.
Yeah. Did he also manage his campaign?
He managed his campaign in '62, I believe.
Okay, good. You know all this stuff. So anyway, it's Bob Finch, and he says, I've got your letter. I just went over it with the president. He said, no matter what I say, I'm going to make the other half of the country angry. There's been no other campus unrest since May 4th. We'd like you to leave it alone if you don't mind. We know you could go to the San Francisco Examiner with your Chronicle and say, gee, the president said he'd do this, he didn't do it. But he said, I don't want to, let's leave it alone if you don't mind. Can we do that? And I thought about it and I go, he's right. You know, why would he do that? So I said, it's closed, case closed. You've answered my questions. So you go back to the question, what did I learn from all this? Howard Means in his book made it abundantly clear that looking back, this is 46 years later for Howard's book, it's abundantly clear that really was the point of the last major campus unrest. Forget the Berkeley stuff you get around here these days of, you know, the speaker comes to town they don't like and they throw, you know, things through windows, but nothing really of any consequence. And that was kind of the turning point, I think. And then the Nixon began to take, I think he started in 1970 getting this reduction of troops in Vietnam. So it was just, you could just see things were starting to turn. And maybe that Kent State thing, which was just really was a problem for everybody, that was enough to make people stop and think and back off. And I think that's the big thing.
Donald Grant, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
That was terrific. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure I think I hear it.
I can hear perfectly back here.
Okay. Do you guys edit these things?
Yeah.
No.